that's where advocacy work first starts because it's the work that you're doing something for someone that can't do it for themselves. Like that's the heart of advocacy. And motherhood is the embodiment of that. I mean, you get a first taste of that. Like this child cannot make it without me, and I am their advocate. You're an extension of their emotions, you're an extension of their physical bodies, you're an extension of everything. And so when you embrace that and when you are empowered in that space, like when you have other kind of support, you allow like, wow, like this is next level influence that I have, right? And you get to feel that. I think you're empowered in every other sphere of your life to have a voice and to be taken seriously and to see needs, to fill those needs, to distribute things in a fair, equitable way, or to see somebody that needs to be seen. It's like all of these different layers of what's wrong with society in which you need to go and advocate for. It all happens at the micro level within motherhood.
I am Shelli Spotts, and I'm here with Carol Allen and Alma. Alma, what is your last name? Remind me.
Olaveson.
Allow Olaveson.
Yeah, you
I
got
love
it.
it. Okay. And we are having a conversation about what it means to work in the advocacy space as moms and as parts of vital growing communities, sort of sparked by the ideas in Alice Walker's book, We Are the Ones We Have Been Waiting For, and Rebecca Walker's book, Baby Love. So I'd love to start with a quote that I love from Alice's book where she says, "We are the ones we've been waiting for because we live in an age in which we are able to see and understand our own predicament. With so much greater awareness than our ancestors and with great capacity for insight, knowledge, and empathy, we are uniquely prepared to create positive change within ourselves and the world." And I love that quote. And one of the things that she addresses and that Rebecca addresses is sort of the difficulty of occupying some of these spaces as moms and as people who are trying to work within our own communities and balance all of the work that needs to be done. So I would love to know, what are some of the ways that you have worked to balance those forces in your lives, both of you?
I'm going to just maybe jump right in and just say, I don't know that it's really a matter of balance. I think that um, the way that advocacy is being viewed is more of a patriarchal lens that we've been looking at it for all of these years because advocacy is such an innate maternal thing to do, to advocate for other people that are vulnerable and can't help themselves. Like that's what we do. Um, and I think that it just comes with the territory of being a mother is to advocate. I think that the work of advocacy has been really like put in a box, like this is what it looks like. And I think that's in part by, this patriarchal lens that everything seems to, things tend to kind of get boxed in that way. And so like the idea of balancing it um, is relevant only so much as if we look at it through that box lens, because then you have to do the balancing. But I think that if you throw that out, then it's not so much a matter of balancing, it's just the ebbs and flows of life and what you're actually advocating for.
Right.
Um, and you just do it. It's like the air you breathe, it's the water you drink. It just comes with the territory. If your kid is being mistreated in some space, you go and you advocate for them. Or if you see injustice or unfairness here or there, you just kind of are present. And I think it's the role of mothers, it always has been, of mothers and grandmothers, to kind of keep the playground safe, keep
Yeah.
keep safe the space is safe for our children. And you just do it. You've got a kid on your hip, you've got, or you're nursing another one, and you get up and you go over there and say, hey, let's share. We're not doing that. Let's not dump sand in, this friend's eyes. You just do it. And so then I think that it just expands into whatever spaces we're in. And I think that's what advocacy is, like at the heart of it. And then when you start looking at it kind of like a work that you do, like I clock in at 9 to 5 work, and I work for this company and this is what we're advocating for, it becomes like a job and it's not who you are and what you do day in and day out. Then I think it needs to be balanced. Does that make sense?
Right. Because I do think one of the foundational ideas here is that it is something that you do outside of yourself. And that's absolutely untrue. I think the best advocacy, the best, changing of the world, the best community building happens as we do the things that we're doing in our lives,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's not stepping outside of ourselves. It's just expanding our efforts within our own sphere.
Hmm.
And speaking of this book by Rebecca Walker, I actually love another quote from a different book by, well, it's a book by Alice that is called The Cushion in the Middle of the Road, where she sort of talked about a time when she thought working for, a better community and a better world around her was done. It was in her past. She was old enough. She didn't need to do it anymore. And she was going to retire to her cushion in the corner of the room, right? And realized that neither of those things were true. She couldn't just retire to a corner of the room and that the work is never done to
Hmm.
change things to be better. And so she was going to drag her cushion into the middle of the road and and sit there in the middle of the road and change the things that she could. And I think that that's more true of what we do. In the
Right.
spaces that we're in, we look around and we look for how we want to make them better. And the best communities start in the very small things that we can do as moms,
Hmm.
right?
I think that's where advocacy work first starts because it's the work that you're doing something for someone that can't do it for themselves. Like that's the heart of advocacy. And motherhood is the embodiment of that. I mean, you get a first taste of that. Like this child cannot make it without me, and I am their advocate. You're an extension of their emotions, you're an extension of their physical bodies, you're an extension of everything. And so when you embrace that and when you are empowered in that space, like when you have other kind of support, you allow like, wow, like this is next level influence that I have, right? And you get to feel that. I think you're empowered in every other sphere of your life to have a voice and to be taken seriously and to see needs, to fill those needs, to distribute things in a fair, equitable way, or to see somebody that needs to be seen. It's like all of these different layers of what's wrong with society and which you need to go and advocate for. It all happens at the micro level within motherhood. And so
Yeah.
if you can see that and if you can figure that out and if you can feel number one empowered by it and then number two like if it can fuel you and it's like it's not something that you clock in and clock out of. It's just a part of who you are. It's like I said before, the air that you breathe and it's extremely fulfilling. Like
Yeah.
it's a good work that you don't need to clock out of. Like almost for Alice Walker, that she at one day wanted to retire from this thing means that we're going about doing it all wrong, in my opinion.
I,
'Cause
Yeah.
it should be fulfilling.
I can see what Carol is saying because a while back we all as humans had a certain understanding of what success was, and it looked like money, cars, big house, etc., or a great job or some amazing promotion. But with more awareness and awakening that we achieve, I think generation after generation, we have come to define success for ourselves. But I think this same approach should be taken in every other aspect as well. What what is activism in our day, especially if we want to prioritize family time, presence, emotionally, physically, mentally, for our children, our marriage, if that's like top priority or essential for you. So then I love what she said, Carol. She said like it's something you do and you are. One thing that I learned in motherhood in the very beginning of it was like flexibility was crucial. And because I went kind of cold turkey into marriage and children, because I worked in the office, I worked in human resources, I worked in where you had the schedule, you had everything in boxes, etc. And then soon after we got married, we decided to create a family. And as soon as I had my son, and I had entertained the thought of like maybe part-time, maybe something. But as soon as I had my son, was like, I didn't feel any desire of returning. But
Yeah.
also there were parts of me that were having a hard time um adjusting to this cold turkey change, and the only support system I have, and I think I speak a lot for the modern motherhood, is your spouse or your partner. uh at least for me and those around me, this is quite true. So you have to, there's so much that you have to flow with, and those two, flexibility and flowing, were the biggest lessons that hit me right away. I'd never heard anyone like, oh, um flexibility is very important in motherhood, or and then when I learned those two lessons, and then I got out into parks and libraries and wherever I would take my kid, then I saw that part of me coming out, like advocating for what I saw necessary, not only for the child as a mother towards the child, but also for myself as a mother, because I didn't see anyone advocating for me. So I was like, if I don't speak up for my own needs too, and then the more I would do that, I would see moms trying to advocate for themselves and their children. So it is part of, it becomes part of the nature, but I think we need to redefine, and I love what Carol is trying to do, because like that outdated definition of success has been kind of pushed. I think we should, there's an there's a need to do that with the activism part of things.
I almost wonder if instead of talking about like this idea of balance and how because that puts everything into this idea of like we're juggling plates, right? Which is not true. What we're doing is dealing with humans. So I almost wonder if what we more need is to figure out how to build larger support systems for one another,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a great
right?
question. Yeah,
Because
like that
I
question.
think modern life sort of deprives us of support systems that are inherently supposed to be part of a community, right?
Yeah.
I read a great book about like how cities are designed, and by Jane Richards, and she talked about the importance of sidewalks and community spaces. And we're living in a time where like a lot of these community spaces are disappearing, where we would interact. And you think about years and years and years ago, and people did laundry together, and people cooked together, and people recreated together, and people raised their children together. And it's not happening anymore. We're living like these very disjointed, separate lives.
Yes, absolutely.
And I almost wonder what it would look like if we could rebuild, and I think we're trying to, some of these support systems for one another.
I personally think it starts with this, like everything starts with the self,
Yeah.
but there, yes, I totally agree with what you're saying, and it's very true that that's happening. But I think the last thing that will die, in my opinion, is the power of the human soul and the human nature. If we overcome the things that we set for ourselves to block us from it, uh no matter how much the cities change, which they are changing and they're not making it easy, we still will seek out each other. But I think there is another layer under that, which this new ways of living are flourishing, is the fact that we are terrified of being seen and being heard, or being our authentic self, or with the pretty, the ugly, and the good. We because inside our homes, if we had cameras, I bet and then we watched this cameras of recording ourselves and got together as a neighborhood, we would see a lot more similarities with each other behind the doors than we will see differences. But then we head out of our door and we act like we are so different, or we put the social faces on, and then we already are hurting each other, and then on top of that, the infrastructure is changing in a way that does not cultivate that togetherness or that day-to-day interaction. Like tiny little interactions are what will keep us sane and healthy and happy and still quite connected, tiny ones. uh, I, it is hard that no one knocks on the door anymore. It is hard that no one even like steps in your house unless you have talked for weeks and days to figure that out. So I think it's a lot. There's so much on us that we can still preserve or bring back that was good in the past, because not everything in the past was bad, you know and not everything now in the present is amazing either. So we have to pick and choose, I feel like.
Yeah, I a couple of years ago we replaced our front door, and we, just had a normal front door. And when we replaced it, we got one of those Dutch doors. Have you seen them, that they're cut in half and the top half can swing without the other? And it has been the best thing I've ever done because it's so interesting to just leave part of your door open, right? And as I say to my students and my kids all the time, there's a metaphor in that. But like literally physically to have part of the door open. And as people walk by our house, I can hear them talking. And sometimes I'll poke my head out and talk to neighbors as they walk past the house. And there's just like this sense of welcomeness that happens that I feel like metaphorically I had been missing in my life. So so yeah, I guess, Carol, what do you think? How can we build better support systems for one another?
I think that's an American issue that we're having right now, and maybe European. I just spent several days camping with my Brazilian family and a ton of Brazilian friends, and they live like this still. A lot of immigrant families live like this still. Um, and it's a survival thing. Like you need each other. So I have a dear sister-in-law, and and her sister. So it's three sisters that have bought homes next to each other, and they live very communally. And one of the sisters recently passed away of breast cancer, and her family would not have survived had the whole family network not been in support. All of the cousins taking care of the other cousins. We just spent time with them. And for all intents and purposes, like given the tragedy they just experienced, these kids are so resilient and are doing phenomenally well emotionally. I mean, of course, they're gonna, they have challenging moments here and there with the loss of their mother recently, but it would have been so far, the challenge would have been so great had the extended family not been so close knit and together, all of the cousins together, all the aunties, all the uncles. And these sisters have stepped in to fill in the loss of the one sister, in nurturing these children, and it's a beautiful thing to behold, and the idea of extended families. And one thing I'd like to just talk about is that there is quite this movement of like, okay, the generation that's gone on before me has made all of these, you know, um, horrible mistakes in parenting and doing all these things. They passed on all of this toxicity, right, to the next generation. And so there's a lot of talk. It's become very, very popular, I want to say, in the world of psychology and healing to set boundaries, right? And to to kind of cut people out of your life that aren't lifting you up, that aren't supportive, this and that. But at the same time, I personally, this is my own belief, um, I don't like that philosophy. I think that we need to definitely be careful so that we're not being abused. But the idea of cutting people out of your life just makes you, so isolated and so alone. I think what's a better option is to help heal things in families, and to leave, like you said, Shelli, like the door open for a future together, as people are renegotiating their, relationships and hopefully growing together and growing closer together. We need each other. And I think immigrant families see it firsthand just because it's like when you're new to a country. I come from an immigrant family, and you become very, very close to people because you're in a totally foreign place and you need other families to help you navigate this totally strange place. You don't speak the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know anything. And so these close families, like my family, we're one of the first families here in Utah, and the families that came that we became friends with are like family to us. We've been through everything together. And so I think though that when you reach some kind of level of privilege, um, other people become optional. You don't really need them. And I think we're kind of coming back to this point in society where we really need each other. Like the mental health crises, the aloneness, the feeling of just being, I don't know, emotionally displaced and disconnected from others is at a crisis point. And I think that it's like an emergency, and we need to start um, recognizing that the more boundaries you set, the more you want to control everything, the more alone you're going to feel. So it's kind of like you're cutting out the very help and support that you actually need. I will say, I mean, there are families in there that exist in the world that are so extremely toxic. There's nothing um, that can be salvaged. Like people literally need to walk away for their own survival. Okay. I'm not talking about those cases. I'm talking about when people get offended, they have different political viewpoints, or it's just there are these minor things that really, really need to be just worked out, and not to throw you know, the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. It's a little bit the act of finding common ground, right?
Right. Right.
Some of, if we look at popular culture, we look at media. Some of my favorite movies are movies about people who are very deeply flawed, who
Mhm.
find like this common ground with other groups and create like a community. I love the movie Steel Magnolias. And a couple of the characters there, they are cranky and they are rude and they are not nice to people and they love each other. And I do think that like anytime we start to interact with a larger group, we have to figure out where we have common ground with one another and build like this larger net that that is beautiful, not in spite of the flaws, but possibly because of them,
Mhm.
right? Because no human being is perfect, and we can't expect them to be. Because if we do, we're falling into sort of this trap of like of whitewashing everything to like this sterileness, right?
We have a big problem with perfectionism in our culture.
We do. And instead of embracing like flaws and seeing them for the vulnerability that people have, like someone showing you the ways in which they're flawed, that's a very, very vulnerable act. And instead of
And
embracing that,
courageous, very courageous.
it is very courageous.
Yeah.
And instead of embracing that, sometimes the culture tells us that we should turn away from that.
Yeah. And those messages are very saddled, but very consistent. And we send those messages to each other in every public space we are, every religion building we sit on. every park, every library, and we all do it consciously or unconsciously. So I love the title of Alice books, like we are who we were waiting for, because that could be used for anything. I am who I'm waiting for. Don't I have the village? Well, I can become the village. Oh, don't am I feeling isolated? Well, I am the one waiting for to undo the isolation. And so I mean, I cannot create a whole what's the word, extended family here. I'm from Albania, but I can build relationships with neighbors and other people that turn into um uh those kind of dynamics, you know. But the other thing is that it has to be there needs to be some reciprocity. And if you are doing it over and over again, but for some reason the other party is not, then it becomes very exhausting and very discouraging, and it becomes even more lonely and yeah, and sad than it was in the first place. So whoever watches this, I would say, like, you are the one what you're waiting for to have in your life for yourself and others, and have courage to just be. And I love when you said that the common ground, and they were rude, and they were you know they were with all the colors that a human being is, but they loved each other. And I feel like with what you just shared was like they took into account the humanity, the human part, the human side. We are all like so human, so flawed. Like nothing is perfect about us, you know. And taking that in, like, outside of your door every time you go out, and interact with that in your mind and your heart, I think will make a huge difference. Because as soon as we go out of the door, we like to be put together, act like everything is together. And I'm not saying I'm not saying like let's create dysfunction out there, and just um disorganization and dysregulation. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying, like, once there are so many cultures, maybe Carol might relate to this, that when you ask someone on the road, hey, how are you, and they had a bad day, they will say you, I'm having a bad day. And they will go on and on. But if you sit there and you listen to that person, right there, right then, the connection happened. He had an ear to listen, to be heard. He doesn't have to pay a therapist every week or every month, you know. So I think the Western world could learn a little bit from this countries that seem so far from the high level of education and intellect, but they have some things that have kept them alive and together for so long, and it's feeding their soul, you know. So you don't have to say always I'm good and everything is good if it's not, you know. And you don't have to get everything out of your gut out there, but what you feel and what you think, you have the courage to express to in an appropriate manner, without disregarding or twisting it, because you have to be presentable, or you have to leave a different impression on someone else.
Yeah.
I like what you said, Alma. When we are in a public setting, that there are, like, you know, rules of engagement, that where you're just not a hysterical mess. Or if you are, it's unusual and people might think that you need serious help or something like that. But at the same time, while still living your life with integrity and being authentic within the parameters of manners, I
Yeah.
guess, like social norms, and we could live more authentically while still within the social constructs of our society. I
Yeah.
think we just live like without thinking, let's say you are really having a hard time and somebody's like, hey, how's it going? You just reply back, oh, good, how are you? Like you don't even think about it. And I think we just need to be a little bit more in tune and intentional with just being authentic, like, oh yeah, I had a rough morning. There's just a lot going on, but thanks for asking. I appreciate that. Just this moment of vulnerability is just a very tiny, subtle thing, like you said, and it might make someone else pause, like, oh wow, like I connected with somebody
Yeah.
today. I had a connection. And so I think that, like, we just need to live maybe more mindfully the minute we walk out the door, to just live, to be more, have more integrity with who we are in
Yeah.
our, because I think having integrity actually allows for connection.
Yeah. And all of this, I think, will be much easier to do if we overcome the fear, because there's fear, there's psychological fear and emotional fear. Is
I want
this,
to ask, why is that? Like, why?
I
Let's unpack that.
think, yeah, I personally think an extreme unhealthy level of fear of judgment and shame,
Yes.
betrayal, and backbiting, gossiping. Um, because the more you share, the more the other person has to work with. But when you try to cultivate the courage and bravery, even if that person does that and it does hurt, you pick up yourself again and you have this courage that will carry you on to some other person, and you'll be wiser and you will have more skills of discernment, etc. So then you will have a better chance. But I think what happens, you get hurt once or twice and you shut down because you think now you don't want to experience that anymore, because it's quite painful. I'm not saying it's not painful, but you then become the one that is hurting yourself way more than someone that you trusted and they betrayed your trust, or they misuse your information, or whatever, your heartfelt vulnerability and authenticity. Then you become your own hurtful tool towards yourself in a very subtle, consistent way for the next 10, 20, 50 years. And we die alone and we die isolated, So I think there's a lot of psychological and emotional fear deeply rooted, and a lot of shame for. And I never went to schools in US, but I've watched movies. I hear, not that there wasn't bullying in Albania, there was, and still to this day there is, but I feel like there is a little bit of more like forgiveness or let go or tolerance, or like, everyone says that, let's move on, like, let's go. And now we are learning a lot more from the West, which is amazing, to deal with bullying in a better way, so we protect. But there is a fine balance between a joke that is not intently to hurt someone. I mean, it might be a bad joke. I'm not saying it's good, but it doesn't have the intent to bully someone. You know, there. I think we need to get better at the skill of discerning. Where is just a human joke? It might not be a good one, but he doesn't have the intent to hurt me and bully me. And believe, or give that, what do we call it in US, the benefit of a doubt, and let it go. But if the person is doing that over and over again, yes, then you have to deal with someone that is bullying you or has an intent behind it. So I think we kind of, Carol uses this, like, we're throwing the baby with the water. If someone makes a bad joke, we directly go to, like, oh, he bullied me, or he was so rude, or this hyperactivity, out of proportion outlook on just someone being human with us, or us being human with someone else, because I'm sure I might hurt someone too. I'm not going to walk around being so watchful that I don't hurt anyone's feelings. Never, ever. Because that's also, it's not life either.
I think additionally, like, even aside from concerns of bullying, right? There's this perception of perfection.
Yeah.
We have to look and be and act a certain way. And I remember walking through a restaurant with my mother-in-law. She passed away in 2018. And she was just the kindest, most generous person I've ever met. And I remember walking through this restaurant with her. She was older. She was walking with a cane. She had a hard time keeping her balance. And she stopped at almost every table. And she stopped at this table full of young people that were all dressed up really fancy. We were out for dinner because my brother-in-law was visiting. And this group of kids, they were, dressed up for a formal dance. So they'd either been to prom or they'd been to something like that. And she stopped and she told all of those young women how beautiful they looked and asked them what they were doing and where they had been and what they had been up to. And we're just trying to get to the table at dinner. And my kids were teenagers and I worried that they were embarrassed by this moment. And now later, and since she has passed away, they talk about that moment. They talk about how she talked to everyone she passed and she was genuinely interested in their lives. And I wonder sometimes if this worry that we look weird if we talk to strangers is a barrier that keeps us from reaching across like this divide of loneliness. So I've turned into the weird person who talks to people in the elevator and people that I that I pass in stores, and I find myself having conversations with strangers over the onions in the grocery store. And it is so free and creates just a much happier experience in everything you do. That ability to just reach out and talk to people anytime. And you'd have to let go of the worry of what are they going to think if you just are suddenly having a conversation over the onions.
I don't know if we can put these things in schools and wherever, but we can start in our families. Like you mentioned, being worried with embarrassment, about embarrassment. I think, the pendulum goes from one side to another. I think we came from a generation where no one talked about emotion. They didn't even know how to name them, etc. Our grandparents and parents, they were like, oh, you're hurting or something happened, go to work hard. Now we are all the way on this other side, like naming every single emotion, identifying every emotion, but we are so stuck on the emotion now. We are like, oh, I'm feeling embarrassed right now, so I have to deal with that, rather than be like, yeah, I'm feeling embarrassed, but I still am going to say hi because I know this is way more valuable and essential for me and the other person, and the long run, our longevity in a quality, healthy way. So I think when you try to heal, like Carol was mentioning, we need to heal. I see it with myself. I see it with a lot of people that I know. Sometimes healing could become as toxic as the thing you're trying to heal from. So I think one skill that we all need to learn is like a deep awareness, and then a deep love and compassion of whatever comes up, to be like, wow, I see my embarrassment right now. It seems overwhelming, but I'm not gonna die. I'm gonna be okay. I think building that skill and making that skill as a second nature, I think will take us quite far, because we all are going to be imperfect no matter how much we heal and no matter how much we stay in the old ways. But being aware and seeing when all these things get their head up, like the cat game that get their head up, then you acknowledge, recognize it, embrace it, and then you're like, well, I have the set of skills. I can pick the skills that I need right now and move forward, and nothing will happen to me. The world is not going to come crashing. The embarrassment is not going to suffocate me, or the fear of judgment, or the fear of shame. Those are emotions and sensations in the body, and they will run through, and you will be still. You'll still live and move forward if that's the choice. But
This brings me back to thoughts of our first topic with advocacy, because I think these same things are some of the elements that keep us from speaking up in the spaces where we can. Where we might be embarrassed to do it, or embarrassed that someone's going to judge us for trying to change things, or for trying to talk about how things can look different. And the word that comes to mind for me with this is grace. Like, we need to offer ourselves grace, and we need to offer other people grace.
yeah.
So
I love that. I also think that the question that comes to mind is how can we foster a deep self-confidence in our children? Because I think when someone is very internally self-confident, they don't get rattled by things as much like embarrassment or shame, or they're more forgiving of themselves and they're more forgiving of others. And they're like, oh, Someone was just super rude to me. They were just off that day. Like, all right, moving on, you know? And then they don't hold grudges. They don't feel they aren't victims. They don't get toppled by every little tiny thing. We're having a real issue with this where it's becoming debilitating for people. Like
It's
I
just functioning in the world is just becoming too overwhelming and too difficult. So my
Car-
question is like resilience and confidence, this inner confidence, like I don't know. For example, I love to come home to a clean house. Okay, because it just makes me feel happy inside. And it was really hard when I was a young mom, and obviously, but I have older kids now, so it's kind of like, okay, we've got this appointment. We're gonna go out of the house. Everybody, we're gonna do a clean sweep of the house 20 minutes before we go. Um, that to me is more important than me looking my very best. Sometimes I'm like, hair up in a sloppy bun. As long as I am clean and I'm dressed appropriate for the weather, I feel like that's my standard, and I don't I'm not ever very worried about what other people think of me with my looks. Because my house is clean. I'm coming home to a clean house.
I
My
love
house is in order. That is my internal confidence that it's kind of like I have my own little world that I live in that nobody can take down. Like no, your opinion of me, like I don't care what it is because I know who I am. And my house is in order today. I left the house in order. And so that makes me feel good. So whatever that is for you out there, I think that that's good. For example, if you do something that makes you proud, you walk out the door with an inner confidence that nobody can shake that. And then you're more willing to give people grace, where if you're mistreated or whatever, it doesn't even rattle you. It doesn't even bother you that much. I mean, you're human, so it does kind of bug you, but you don't perseverate on it and it doesn't break you down because you know who you are. You've accomplished those things inside. Maybe it's like, I'm a good mom. I know who I am. Or my house is in order. You don't know who I am, you know? It's kind of like you come back to that little kernel of worth, of self-worth, whatever that is to you. And nobody else can take that away. Nobody can. And I get that directly from God personally. So it's like when I'm in good conscience with God and I'm doing my best, there is nobody that can take that away from me. And so I walk around with my head held high, and it doesn't matter that I'm wearing all of the right brands. And I will say that we're having a big epidemic in our society that is just our worth is being directly attached to brands, to looks. And I think
yes.
that's so sad. I think that's so scary to me because that's such a fragile state. Like if you're not walking around with the right X, Y, or Z, that you have no self-worth, that you just don't feel good about yourself, how sad is that? And so that's my thing is like, I took care of all my animals today. Everything in my care is alive. I walk around the house before I leave. I'm like, plants, are you doing okay? Okay, you're okay. I'll get back to you when I get back. But everything under my care and my stewardship is thriving. That nobody can take that away from me. I know who I am. I'm a nurturer and I'm doing good at my job. So I can walk out of my house and I may not be put together in the eyes of whoever. They may be judging me like I'm a hot mess or something like that. But I know who I am. My house is in order and everything in my care is alive and thriving. So I hold my head up high and nobody can bother me. And
Yeah.
that's how I get through life. That's my own confidence. It's very deep, deep within me, and it comes directly from God and my relationship with God. And so I feel like that's my little nugget to throw out to the world. That's how I'm doing it. There may be a million different ways to do it, but I think that if you were to peel back the layers of the onion of what we're really struggling with, I think it's struggling with self-worth and struggling with inner confidence.
Yes. And our sense of resilience comes from that, right?
Yes. Yes.
As as a mom of like my kids are in their 20s now. And I had this conversation with my oldest daughter recently because she was telling me about a couple of her friends who just are really down on themselves all the time and doubting, their worth and what they're doing with their lives. And she looked at me and she said, "Mom, I just don't understand it." And I was like, okay, I'm glad you don't understand that, but why? She was like, because I have never doubted that I am a worthwhile human being. And I've never doubted that I had talents for some things and that maybe I have to work on them and I have to work hard on them, but that they're there and that I can improve them. And I looked at her and I went, I don't know that I did anything to create this child.
I
Like,
think you did. I'm
I
sure
like,
you did.
but she's amazing to me. And like her outlook is amazing. And each of my kids has sort of found a niche within themselves. And maybe that is their grounding with God. And that they know that as humans, they are a worthwhile human. But my youngest is out doing sales right now for the summer. And he just comes home and texts us because he's in a different state, funny stories. And I said, how do you not get down when you have so many doors slammed in your face? And he's like, because the doors, it's not me. They're not closing the door in my face. They maybe don't want what I have to offer, but I can talk to them and tell funny stories and we can have a good sense of humor. And I can be like, yeah, man, you don't want what I want or what I'm trying to sell you, but we still had an interaction as humans. And I think like creating an environment where your kids realize that they can make those genuine interactions with other human beings is so good and such an authentic place to be in. So yeah, I love that question. Like, how can we do that as moms? How can we do that for our kids?
I wanted to say, I mean, you know this, everyone knows this. The best way to teach is by being, because we can tell our kids all day, every day, be confident or you are amazing or whatever, But if you are a crumbling cookie and you have zero confidence within yourself, they will pick up on that rather than what you have been preaching to them. When my son was 2 years old, I threw a big birthday, and my husband brought his own friends. I brought mine, but the parties did not know each other, and it was so difficult because the adults were not talking to each other, And I know they didn't know each other. I know, but instead of choosing to be awkward, why couldn't they chosen to say like, "Hey, how are you? How are you related to Alma and Sean?" So it starts with us. It starts with the adult, and I love that you guys are pointing out the source of your confidence. For me personally, is Heavenly Mother and Heavenly Father. And I wanted to say to all of them that maybe did not have a very fortunate start and no one told them how precious and wonderful they are. And maybe they have internalized not only those messages, but every other message around them throughout their life, that you are precious. You are full of value, full of worth. No matter the messages that were given to you or told to you and you have internalized them, and there are higher beings that love you unconditionally and see the power in you without your shortcomings and your flaws. Like they see the absolute potential that exists in you and could be coming out of you if you choose to do so. So I think the adult is the first example, for that child to grow up confident, resilient, full of social skills. I personally, when I moved in this neighborhood, I've been here for 3 years. My son was about 2 years old when we moved here. He's 5 now. He wanted friends and no one would knock on our door, but he was like, "Can I go knock?" And I would let him knock and I would let him have the door shut on him at 2 years old. And I would stand there and I would wait for him to be sad or be happy. And we would handle that. And even to this day, my son goes and knocks on people's doors and gets more no's than yes for the kids to play or whatever. We cannot change people. No one has power to change anyone, only ourselves. But I would definitely, the adults do have that power. So we, the adults, can be that, express that, show that. And then the child will know that, oh, it's not scary to go talk to someone at a birthday, even that I don't know who he is, but we are in the same birthday. So I bet we might know the same people here. It's not rocket science. But when the adults choose otherwise, then eventually, when the child grows, he will understand how these things are supposed to be done. So if you go to a party and you don't know the other side of the people that are invited, then you're going to act like mom and dad. You're not going to talk to anyone, you know?
Yeah.
So I do agree with that confidence. I do agree with that, but that should be us that,
We have to model it.
yeah, absolutely, 100%, 100%. Yeah.
My husband always, when we have people over for dinner, and mostly family. So when we have family over for dinner, he will say, as we get our food and go to sit down, he'll be like, sit by someone you don't know.
Yeah.
Always gets a laugh when we know everyone and have known them for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
But I love just that concept. Even if you think you know someone, is there a way you can get to know them better, right? Is there
Exactly.
a way that you can reach out and say, "Hey, how are you doing? What's going on in your life?"
Yeah.
You know, we don't know everything about everyone. So yeah, sit by someone you don't know or find out something that you didn't know about the person you thought you did know. So
It feels good to connect, to really connect with someone. It does, it feels good. And I think the problem that we have is that we're not connecting like authentically with people, so it feels weird and awkward.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think that's the problem. I think that's what people are afraid of is it. And I think that maybe an exercise we can all do is when we do connect with someone authentically, we have to isolate that and be like, oh my gosh, I just connected with somebody authentically. That feels so good. And then you can identify what it looks like and what it feels like, and then you can repeat it again. The problem is that it's so nebulous, like you're having little interactions with people all the time, that it just feels off. It feels clunky, it feels awkward, and that is embarrassing, I guess. And people just don't like how that feels. But that's not the exact thing as connecting authentically with someone.
Yeah.
So I think we need to identify it when it happens and then try to recreate it as often as possible. And I
Yeah.
have this little parable that happened to me. I'm sure I've shared it before. It's one of my favorite little experiences that I've had in learning a lesson in my garden. Um, Me and my family, we came back from a really big, long trip, and there were plants that were desperate for water. And I went into my shed and I grabbed the nearest watering can I could find, and I went and grabbed it and then filled it up. And as I'm heading out to water my intended trees in the orchard, I found that there was a huge gash on the side of my watering can. It was like a broken watering can. So water's just spilling out consistently. And as water's spilling out, I'm realizing, okay, well, on my way to the intended trees I was going to water, oh, I can actually water over here and over here and over here. So I meandered and went through all of these plants that actually really needed water too. And my analogy is that we're all broken vessels. All of us are broken, and there's water spilling out. The question is, we need to connect ourselves to the source of infinite abundance. To me, it's Jesus Christ. Once I'm plugged into Jesus Christ, I have an ever flowing, that living water that's always welled up within me. And whatever spills out, whoever I'm walking and bump up against, that water can spill out onto them. And it's Christ's living water. And if you think about, I'm going to bring it back to Christ, it's the Sabbath day, and he's just been on my mind extra today. Um, Christ was the living example of this, where he was on his way to perform a miracle, and he performed three other miracles on his way to perform a miracle. And so I live by the idea that every single person put in my path that day was meant to be there. And I could either have good things spill out of me and water them and nurture them, which is, from the source of infinite abundance, which to me is my Savior Jesus Christ, or I can be an empty, dry person.
yeah,
And somebody might be needing watering, you know? And I think that it's all a matter of getting plugged in to the source,
mhm,
and don't think for a second that we're these whole vessels, because it's not even about the vessel, it's about the water,
Yeah.
yes,
right?
yeah,
So the fact that you even have a gash means that you can spill out all the more freely. You're more authentic. You're more You're a broken vessel. It means like you can water more people because you've had life hit you pretty hard. And that's
Well,
okay.
and embracing that
And
and
embrace that.
find,
We're all broken.
Yeah.
finding beauty in it, because I think we tend to look at things as flaws and not find how they can be blessings,
Mhm.
right? I am a crier. I have a hard time with anything with a lot of emotion. Speaking of water, uh, tears well over. And I work with the young people in my neighborhood in our church group, and there are several other criers in our group. And we were talking about it because that is seen as a flaw, this overflowing and overwhelming of emotion that sort of chokes you up. And yet I think it's such a beautiful blessing where you can express to someone how you're feeling in this very beautiful way. It's a gift to be able to share that vulnerability and that emotion with others, and for them to see when you're touched and when you're feeling strongly. And so we tend to try and muffle it, and instead we should be embracing it. And I think that, yeah, this idea of embracing our flaws, it's all about the process, it's all about the journey, not the perfect product that we create at the end. And I think we've gotten caught up in this perfect product. So it makes me think of when I teach my creative writing classes. I teach my writers that you can't create a good story, you can't create a good narrative out of nothing. And Ursula Le Guin, who is a fantasy writer, she talked about what she called the carrier bag theory, that you live your life with this metaphorical bag. And as you go throughout your day, you stuff all of the broken bits and pieces that you're gathering of experiences and smiles and conversations and things that you see and things that you hear, and you shove them in the bag. And they're not whole pictures. They're little snapshots. They're little fragments. They're just things that you pick up. And at the end of the day, you dump this bag out and you look at how you can craft something beautiful out of it. So we're not looking for the beautiful final product. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for a lot of broken pieces that we can combine together and make something new and beautiful out of them. And I've always really loved that on a literary level, but also from a living level, right? We're all collections of broken pieces that are spilling water and tears all over everyone we run into.
and and when you spill that water, you also, whatever seed is on that path also blossoms too. So there should not be shame and embarrassment that you have a certain experience or a certain part of you that you don't feel super proud, or you want to hide it, or you want to shove it away, because the other person could have that part too. And that, when that comes to, like, when you put all those parts from the bag and you create something else and you go out just like that, then that other person will do the same, eventually, maybe not right away. So, but I think the issue happens when we go to an event or whatever, and we go with all our parts fragmented, and then that other person does the same. So when you start a conversation, maybe both of you have picked two or three parts of yourself, and you're trying to connect with each other through those three or four parts. But Carol was pointing it out, the infinite abundance, that also it's wholeness. And now, especially on Instagram, wherever you go, everyone is trying to teach and preach and coach everyone how to be whole and complete. And I feel like we are already whole and complete. It's just layers of experiences, and some of them have not been good, and then we might have internalized that in such a way that is hurting us and is hurting relationships. But that's where the healing comes in, so you can uncover the wholeness again and that infinite abundance again, and then you interact and carry yourself wherever you are from that state of self, the whole one, the complete one, full of abundance. And I loved, I think Carol was trying to say this, that it's not about the vessel, because we are that vessel, broken, not broken, with holes, no holes, 500 holes, 2 holes, who knows. Um, it's the consciousness that is trying to live through you and do what consciousness does best. And what consciousness does best is usually pure love and connection and thriving and blossoming. So then it's us that we sometimes, with whatever we have internalized or pattern of thinking or perspectives and perceptions, that kind of hurts us, and that's where I think the self responsibility comes in. So you can take that responsibility and be like, hey, you know what, I'm gonna stop doing this to myself, because I am made of this material that is abundance, is consciousness, is wholeness, and is complete. It's complete, like nothing bad, nothing broken about it. And I can take care of these things that kind of filters it in a way that is not benefiting me or other people. And there's so many tools today, especially in the Western world, that we can use to allow that abundance and that consciousness to not get blocked, to not get stuck, to not get awkward and weird and twisted, but to just flow out of us, just like light and energy. And this is the other thing. If you watch X Factor, and you mentioned in one of the texts, you said enthusiasm, which means the presence of God in you. When people say he has the X factor, he's basically, what he's doing is allowing all that natural energy or consciousness or abundance through voice or through art or whatever. And he does it in such a way that he has not overcome, but maybe for that 5 minute performance, he is not thinking of like, how am I looking? Or he's not self-conscious. Self-consciousness is misery, and that's something we need to learn skills how to overcome and let it go and let it be. But I think there is, I don't know when it started, but is this trend of, if you are self-conscious, you take care of manners better, or no, you're basically being miserable because you are watching and reading everything and internalizing it through your own limited mind and patterns and whatever, rather than trying to be present and be the vessel, and let that power come out of you. And guess what, people are around you gonna feel like, oh my gosh, he's himself, it's so much fun. And then you are gonna encourage the other person to do the same. And I
Yeah.
feel like two ladies that wrote this to books, mother and daughter, uh, they reached this point at some point in their life in different directions for different things, but they were authentic to what they thought that uh, they believed and they wanted to express and they wanted to come out of them. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's, I don't know if we can teach this in schools, and because schools also are quite outdated in my opinion, and there needs to be so much change there, and there's so much need for this kind of skills, this kind of abilities, and we are born with them, but we do need help to cultivate them and live in them and make them second nature. And moms can do that individually in their homes, and dads can do too, but not everyone has the luxury of a mom and a dad in the house. And people have to work, people have to eat, a lot of other physical needs come first, the hierarchy of Maslow, you have to have the food first, etc. So um, I hope conversations like this and podcasts, which has blown all around the world, could help people get that education that maybe the schools are so outdated to give. So
I
hopefully
love that.
this helps.
And I love that we've been able to come together as we're finishing up. I think one of the quotes from Rebecca's book, Baby Love, that I really loved is it says, when it comes down to it, what life is about is showing up for the people you love again and again and again and again. And I think that that's a lot of what we've been talking about, that what we can do in the spaces we have and in the time we have is just show up for those people again and again and again and again. So thank you guys for being with me.
Thanks,
It's
Shelli. That was a fun conversation. Thanks, Alma.
Thank you for your
A
time.
lot to think about.
Yes.
If this conversation was meaningful to you, we'd love for you to pay it forward and share. Learn more at bigoceanwomen.org and join us next time as we talk with Kavika Allen, Professor of Counseling Psychology at BYU, and Nathan Ormsby, Director of Student Wellness at BYU. Both have valuable insights on how we can support the men in our lives and their emotional health.